Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe my channel. Enjoy the listening. The Galactic Empire laughed at humans. Until we laughed louder. The Galactic Empire had seen thousands of species rise and fall under its rule. Civilizations bowed before its might, their cultures assimilated or crushed to them. Humanity was nothing more than another primitive species, barely worth notice, weak, fragile, and utterly unremarkable, until we laughed. It started with the first human envoy to the Imperial Council, a meeting of the most advanced races in the known universe. The council chamber was an immense, marble-like structure floating in the void of space, surrounded by the glittering stars of conquered worlds. Seated in a vast circle were the galaxy's most powerful leaders, their forms as varied as their home worlds, scaled, feathered, tentacled, crystalline, and things beyond description. At the center stood Ambassador James Carter, the first human ever to step into the chamber. He was alone, a single unarmed man representing an entire planet. The High Chancellor of the Empire, a towering reptilian with molten gold eyes, addressed him with a sneer. "Humanity of soul," he said, his voice a rumbling earthquake. "You stand before the Council of Galactic Supremacy State. Your case, though I assure you, will change nothing. Your kind is weak, insignificant, and doomed to serve." The chamber filled with murmurs of amusement, some delegates even chittered in their own guttural tongues, their equivalent of laughter. The Empire had encountered countless civilizations and none had withstood its rule. Humanity would be no different. Then James Carter did something no species had ever done before, he laughed. Not a nervous chuckle, not a bitter scoff, but a full, genuine belly-aching laugh, the kind that makes you slap your knee and struggle to breathe. The entire chamber fell silent. Some species blinked, others stiffened. The High Chancellor's molten eyes narrowed. "What do you find amusing, human?" he demanded. "James," Carter said, wiping a tear from his eye, sorry, it's just." He let out another chuckle. "You actually think we're weak?" The silence deepened, the air grew thick with tension. The High Chancellor bared his fangs. "Are you mocking us?" "Yeah." James grinned. "Yeah, I guess I am." A few delegates shifted uncomfortably. No species had ever dared speak to the Empire this way. Empires were feared, not mocked, they were destroyers, not the butt of a joke. "You misunderstand the power before you," the High Chancellor growled. "Our fleet has conquered thousands of worlds, our soldiers have crushed entire armies, our weapons could reduce your home world to ash in seconds. You are insects before us." James tilted his head, still smirking. "And yet you're scared of a joke." A ripple of unease passed through the chamber. Some species understood humor, most did not. But fear was universal. "You misunderstand nothing," the Chancellor slammed a clawed hand against the armrest of his throne. "You are insignificant. You have no technology to rival ours, no armies capable of standing against us, no genetic superiority, no psychic potential. You have nothing." James leaned forward, resting his hands on the podium. "Oh, we have something, all right." The Chancellor's glare intensified. "And what, human, do you have?" James's grin widened. "We have us." A murmur spread through the chamber. The Chancellor scoffed, "Us? Do not speak in riddles, human. Your kind is nothing, that's what you don't get." James said in a steady voice, "Every species you've conquered fought as you expected them to, with strength, with power, with logic. But humans, we fight differently. We fight dirty, we fight smart, and above all," his grin turned sharp, "we fight like we've got nothing to lose." The chamber remained silent, but the weight of his words hung in the air. "Every species you've crushed had a breaking point, a moment when they realized they couldn't win, a moment when they gave up. I took a step forward, and I saw that humans don't have that moment." The Chancellor scoffed with arrogant words, "You think so?" James raised an eyebrow. "Tell me, How many of your conquered species made weapons that could destroy entire planets before they even left their solar system? How many of your species wiped themselves out multiple times in their own history and kept coming back? How many of your species found a way to turn their own emotions into a weapon? You think you understand rage, hate, desperation. You don't, but we do, and we use it. The High Chancellor shifted in his throne for the first time, his eyes betrayed something beyond annoyance, doubt. James saw it and pressed on, you don't understand humans, not really. Look at our size, our strength, our short lifespans, and you think we're weak, but you forgot the one thing that makes us dangerous. And what is that? The Chancellor growled. We don't know when to quit. He stepped back, letting his words sink in. Every species you fought, they understood when they were beaten, when they saw the fight was hopeless, they surrendered. That's the smart move, right? Logical. His voice dropped. Humans aren't logical. Silence enveloped the council chamber, which had once been filled with mockery, and now pulsed with an unspoken tension. You can conquer our worlds, James said, his voice almost a whisper, you can burn our cities, you can kill our leaders, but you'll never break us, because the moment you think you've won, we'll still be there. He leaned in, his voice barely audible, and will be laughing for the first time in history. The Galactic Empire had no response, and that was when humanity won. The silence in the chamber stretched on, thick and heavy, for the first time in its long and bloody history. The Galactic Council did not know how to respond. They had encountered defiance before, of course, entire civilizations had thrown themselves against the might of the Empire only to be ground into dust, but this was different. This wasn't defiance in the face of superior power, this was amusement. The High Chancellor's molten gold eyes remained locked on James Carter, searching for weakness, for some sign that this human was bluffing, but there was nothing, no fear, no hesitation, just that maddening, infuriating grin. You overestimate yourselves, the Chancellor finally said, his voice quieter now, more measured. Your kind has only just stepped into the void, while we have ruled the stars for millennia. Your ships are primitive, your technology laughable, your military, he sneered, is nothing but an unruly pack of savages with crude weapons. James folded his arms. And yet here you are, trying real hard to convince yourself that we aren't a problem. He chuckled. Let me guess, this little speech of yours is for them. He gestured to the other council members, trying to keep them from realizing what he had just done. The Chancellor's eyes narrowed. And what, human, have I just? James leaned forward, resting his elbows on the podium. In a conspiratorial whisper, he said, you're afraid of us. A ripple of unease passed through the chamber, the tension shifted, subtle but undeniable. Before, it had been the laughter of an arrogant empire mocking a lesser species, now, it felt like something else entirely, it felt like doubt. The High Chancellor scoffed, though there was something forced about it. You are mistaken, he said. Your kind is insignificant. You will be brought to heel like all the others. James raised an eyebrow. Will we? The Chancellor straightened. Your planet will be given an opportunity, he announced, addressing the chamber once more. Submit willingly, and you will be allowed to exist under imperial rule, resist, and, his voice dropped, we will burn. A murmur of agreement rippled through the council. It was the same ultimatum that had been given to countless species before, the same choice, servitude or annihilation. James tilted his head, as if considering the offer, then very deliberately, he pulled something from his pocket, a small black rectangle. The Chancellor's eyes flicked to it. What is that? James grinned. Oh, just my communicator. Thought I'd show you something. He tapped the screen a few times, then turned it towards the gathered council. A hologram flickered to life, a live feed from somewhere deep in space. The perspective was shaky, the image grainy, but it was clear enough, a fleet, a human fleet. Dozens of ships, ugly and brutish compared to the sleek, elegant designs of the Imperial Armada. Scarred hulls, mismatched components, weapons that looked bolted on rather than properly integrated, a patchwork force cobbled together from whatever humanity had been able to muster. But they weren't retreating, they weren't hiding, they were advancing. The murmurs in the chamber grew louder. The Chancellor's eyes narrowed. In a desperate display, he scoffed, "Your ships are obsolete. They will be nothing but debris by the end of the cycle." James smirked. "Maybe, but you missed something." He swiped the screen, changing the angle of the feed. The perspective shifted, zooming in on a single vessel, a massive, hulking dreadnought, painted across its hull in bright, defiant letters was a single phrase, "Nice try." The chamber erupted into chaos. Council members turned to one another, confused, uncertain. The Chancellor's expression darkened. "What does this mean?" he demanded. James leaned back, looking far too relaxed for someone who had just threatened an empire. "It means," he said, "you've already lost." "Lost?" The Chancellor bared his fangs. "Explain." James shrugged. "You think we don't know how outmatched we are, that we don't know our ships are weaker, our weapons outdated?" He chuckled. "You don't get it, do you? We're not here to win." He gestured to the hologram of the fleet. "It's not a fleet, it's a message." The murmurs grew louder. The Chancellor's claws tightened around the armrest of his throne in a desperate display. "A message?" James grinned. "Yeah, it says, 'Come and get us.'" The room fell silent again. "This isn't like your other wars," James continued. "Those species you crushed, they wanted to survive, they wanted to win. But humanity," he laughed, "we're crazy enough to enjoy this." He stepped forward, resting his hands on the podium. "You think you can break us? Go ahead, try. Wipe out a city, and we'll turn the rubble into a bunker. Kill 1 million of us, and 10 million more will pick up a gun. We'll fight you with knives, with rocks, with our bare hands if we have to." He leaned in, his tone intense, "Because we don't fear you, we welcome the fight." The High Chancellor said nothing. His claws dug into the throne, cracking the stone beneath them. James smiled. "So yeah, you can conquer us, you can kill us, but you'll never stop us." He spread his arms. "And the best part? We'll be laughing the whole damn time." With that, he turned off the communicator, placed it back in his pocket, and casually walked towards the exit. He didn't need to stay to hear the Chancellor's response, because deep down, they all knew the war had already begun, and humanity had already won. The High Chancellor sat in silence, his molten gold eyes locked on the place where James Carter had stood moments ago. Around him, the council chamber was a storm of noise, frantic murmurs, nervous whispers, and the hushed growls of those who had begun to understand the true weight of what had just happened. For the first time in the Empire's long and violent history, a species had not only refused to kneel, but had mocked them, and that terrified them. A member of the Zarth Dominion, a crystalline being whose form shimmered like fractured ice, spoke up. "This cannot stand," it hissed, its voice as sharp as breaking glass. "The humans are primitive, but they are dangerous, their existence threatens the very structure of the Empire." A six-limbed warlord from the Golan clan slammed a fist against the table. "They are mad men. To defy the Empire is one thing, but to mock it." His mandibles clicked furiously. "We should wipe them out now before their insanity spreads." "Yes," came another voice, this time from a shadowy figure wrapped in layers of deep blue silk, "a quick, decisive extermination, their planet must burn." But not everyone agreed. The emissary of the Zari, a species of tall, silver-skinned beings with luminous eyes, raised a delicate hand. "Are you all truly so blind?" she asked softly, but her voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Did you not see what the human was doing?" The chamber fell into an uneasy silence as she turned her glowing gaze toward the High Chancellor. This was no mere defiance, no desperate attempt at intimidation, the human was playing with us. The Chancellor did not respond. He wanted us to react this way, to lash out, to declare war, and we are falling into his hands exactly as he planned. The warlord growled, "You suggest we do nothing?" The emissary smiled. "I suggest we think," another council member, a hunched and wrinkled being whose species had long served the Empire as record-keepers, added. "The humans, they are unlike anything we have encountered before." His voice was ancient and weary. "Their history is a series of conflicts, each more brutal than the last. They have never known peace. For them, war is not an aberration, it is their natural state." The Chancellor's claws dug into his throne. He had known this, of course. The briefings on humanity had been clear: they had fought others for millennia, waged wars that defied reason, slaughtered their own kind over gods and land and pride. They had developed weapons of mass destruction before they even left their own atmosphere. And yet, despite all that, perhaps because of it, they had survived, thrived. He thought of the words James Carter had spoken, "You don't know when to quit." He thought of the human fleet, those crude, badly edited ships flying straight toward an enemy they had no hope of defeating, and he realized something: James Carter had been telling the truth. The humans were not here to win, they were here to make the war unwinnable. The Chancellor exhaled slowly, suppressing the growl in his throat, and turned to the gathered council. His expression became unreadable. "Prepare the fleet," he commanded. The chamber erupted in a chorus of approval. The war had begun. Deep in the void of space, aboard the bridge of the UNS Ironclad, James Carter sat comfortably in his chair, sipping a cup of terrible instant coffee. "You think they bought it?" asked Captain Valdez, standing beside him. James chuckled. "Oh, they bought it, all right." Valdez folded her arms, watching the holographic display of the Empire's fleet mobilizing. "You do realize we don't actually have a plan to win this, right?" she said. James grinned. "Yeah, and that's exactly why we will." She raised an eyebrow. James leaned back, kicking his feet up onto the console. "See, they're used to wars with rules, with objectives, with end games. We don't do that. We don't fight to win, we fight to make them regret ever starting it in the first place." Valdez exhaled. "So we just make their lives hell?" James smirked. "Exactly. They want a war." He took another sip of coffee and then said, "Let's give them one they'll never forget." And in the cold depths of space, the laughter of humanity echoed. The Imperial war machine moved swiftly. Within days, the first waves of their armada began assembling on the edges of human space, an overwhelming force of dreadnoughts, cruisers, and carriers that had crushed 100 civilizations before. They were ready for war, what they weren't ready for was us. Somewhere in deep space, aboard the UNS Ironclad, James Carter and Captain Valdez stood before a massive hollow map of the Sol system. Around them, a handful of commanders and specialists studied the map, their faces grim but determined. "They'll hit us hard," Valdez said, arms folded. "A full-scale invasion, they're bringing their biggest guns, their deadliest ships. We won't win in a head-on fight." James grinned. "Good. We're not going to fight them head-on." One of the officers, a grizzled veteran named Lieutenant Singh, frowned. "Sir, with all due respect, how the hell are we supposed to win this?" James took a sip of his coffee and set it down on the table. "Singh, tell me something. How do you beat a predator that's bigger, stronger, and faster than you?" Singh hesitated. "You don't." James pointed at him. "Exactly, you don't. You make it chase you. You frustrate it. You exhaust it." He smirked. "We're not here to fight them, we're here to make them regret ever stepping foot into our system." A younger officer raised an eyebrow. "And how do we do that?" James's smirk widened. "We do what humans do best, we become their worst nightmare." The Imperial fleet moved with mechanical precision. Its formations were tight, its ships gleaming with the cold efficiency of a war machine that had never known failure. As they entered human-claimed space, they expected resistance, a desperate defense, perhaps even an attempted surrender. What they got was chaos. The first attack came not from battleships but from debris, clusters of old satellites, space junk, and broken-down cargo freighters that had been booby-trapped, loaded with explosives, and hidden in asteroid fields. As soon as Imperial ships approached, the debris detonated, not enough to destroy them outright, but enough to cause damage, disrupt their shields, and force them to recalculate their formations. Then came the electronic warfare. Every Imperial fleet ran on tight, well-coordinated data networks, until human hackers got involved. They hijacked communication lines, flooded enemy targeting systems with false readings, and turned Imperial ship sensors against them, making them fire on phantoms, ghost signals that flickered in and out like enemy ships that weren't really there. Entire squadrons broke formation, chasing after enemies that didn't exist. Then, as confusion spread through the fleet, the real attacks began. Small, fast-moving human ships, cobbled together from old cargo haulers and retrofitted civilian vessels, darted through the chaos, hitting weak points and disappearing before the Empire could retaliate. It wasn't war, it was harassment. The Empire had fought wars before. It had crushed rebellions, conquered entire star systems, but it had never faced an enemy that refused to engage in a proper battle. "We need to bring them to order," one of the Imperial admirals growled, watching the erratic, seemingly random human attacks. "They're acting like vermin." A silence fell over the command bridge because that was exactly the problem. Humans weren't fighting like soldiers, they were fighting like hunters, like guerrillas, like terrorists, like an enemy that didn't need to win, just needed to make the other side miserable. The Empire had expected an enemy that would submit or perish. Instead, they had found an enemy that was laughing while they burned everything down. And it was only the beginning. Back aboard the Ironclad, James Carter watched the reports roll in. Another supply convoy lost. Another Imperial battleship forced into retreat. Another communication relay jammed beyond repair, all without a single major battle. Valdez let out a low whistle. "I think they're starting to get pissed." James grinned. "Good. Angry enemies make mistakes." Singh shook his head in disbelief. "We're actually making this work." James leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "Oh, Singh, we're just getting started. Because this wasn't a war of conquest, this wasn't a war of strategy, this was a war of attrition, and humanity was very, very good at making people regret their decisions." The Imperial fleet had never known fear until now. The High Chancellor sat in his private war chamber aboard the Indomitable, the largest and most powerful dreadnought in the Imperial Armada. Around him, his most trusted generals and admirals stood, their faces grim, watching the latest battle reports, or rather, the latest disasters. Entire squadrons were lost without a single proper engagement, supply lines were severed, communications disrupted. Their fleet was enormous, their weapons superior, and yet they were losing, not in the sense of defeat, but in the slow, excruciating way a predator starves because its prey refuses to be caught. "This is unacceptable," one of the admirals hissed, his scaled face tight with barely contained fury. "We came to crush them, yet they mock us at every turn." The High Chancellor's golden eyes flickered toward the hollow map. "The humans have no fleet to rival ours, no planetary defenses that could stand against Imperial bombardment, and yet our forces are struggling because humanity isn't fighting a war, they're playing a game." He continued, "A cruel, insane, brilliantly effective game. The moment an Imperial fleet settled into orbit around a human-controlled colony, the madness would begin. False distress signals lured ships into ambushes, space stations that seemed abandoned would suddenly explode, taking entire destroyers with them. Human ships, barely held together, scraps of metal and desperation, would ram into Imperial carriers, detonating payloads designed to pierce even the strongest armor. And the worst part, the messages on every wrecked Imperial ship, on every hacked transmission, on every intercepted signal, humanity left messages. Some were taunts that said, "All you got, try harder." "Oops, did we do that?" Others were worse. Imperial soldiers found their own security footage played back at them, but edited, showing themselves being ambushed, their commanders slain, their ships burning. It hadn't happened yet, but it would. Humanity was taunting them with their own future. The psychological toll was devastating. The Empire had never fought an enemy like this. They had fought warriors, conquerors, armies that met them on the battlefield, but humans fought like monsters. They burrowed into shadows, struck from the dark, laughed in the face of annihilation, and, worst of all, they were having fun. The Imperial officers were losing control of their own soldiers. Rumors spread, terrible, stupid rumors, that human ships could phase in and out of existence, that human soldiers could kill with just a look, that humans had no fear, no pain, no limit to their madness. The High Chancellor had ordered strict discipline, but even he could see the unease in his own ranks. Some officers refused to patrol human-controlled sectors, some deserted. The war was turning into something else. It was no longer about conquest, it was about surviving the nightmare. Then one day, the Empire received a message. Not a threat, not a battle plan, but a simple broadcast message sent across all Imperial channels, a video feed. It was James Carter, sitting in a chair, holding a cup of coffee, and smiling as casually as ever. "Hey there, guys," he said, his voice almost cheerful. "Been a while. How's the invasion going?" The silence in the Imperial war chamber was deafening. James took a slow sip of his coffee, then leaned forward. "So listen," he said. "We get it, you're the big, scary empire. You got the fleets, the firepower, the whole unstoppable force thing going on. But here's the thing, you're not fighting an enemy," his voice dropped to a whisper, "you're fighting an idea." A chill ran through the chamber. James leaned back, stretching lazily. "You can bomb our cities, you can kill millions of us, hell, you might even glass Earth itself," he winked, "but it won't matter." He gestured to the screen. "You see this war? It's already over." The High Chancellor's claws dug into his throne. "Lies," he growled, empty bravado in his tone. "You thought we'd break?" James chuckled, taking another sip of his coffee. "You thought we'd beg for mercy?" His smile turned sharp. "We don't beg, we laugh." His voice grew softer. "And when you finally realize you can't win, when your ships are broken, your soldiers afraid to sleep, your commanders questioning their orders, you'll ask yourselves one simple question." James leaned in, resting his chin on his hands, his grin now terrifying. "Was conquering us worth it?" The video cut to black, silence, pure and deafening, consumed everything. For the first time in history, the High Chancellor knew what it meant to feel true dread, because he had the sickening realization that James Carter was right. They could not win this war, not because humanity was stronger, not because humanity had better weapons, but because humanity had nothing to lose, and the most dangerous enemy in the universe was one that enjoyed the fight. The Imperial war effort was unraveling. It didn't happen in a single moment, nor with a grand battle, no dramatic last stands, no heroic sacrifices, just a slow, insidious rotting from within. The first official desertions began within the lower ranks. Scouts, engineers, communications officers who had seen too much stopped responding to orders. Some fled into deep space, others were found floating in escape pods, their faces blank with terror, muttering the same phrase over and over, "They don't stop, they never stop." Entire patrol fleets would vanish, their last transmissions filled with nothing but laughter. Commanders lost faith in their own systems. They stopped trusting their scanners, their intel, their own soldiers, because every time they thought they had the humans cornered, every time they prepared for an overwhelming strike, it turned into a trap. The war was no longer about conquest, it was about surviving the nightmare. Aboard the Indomitable, the High Chancellor stood in silence, watching the latest reports scroll across the command screens. His admirals and generals stood around him, but none dared to speak. The once mighty Imperial war machine was coming apart at the seams. Entire fleets had stopped responding. Planetary governors were defying orders, unwilling to send reinforcements to the Sol front. Some species within the Empire had begun questioning their loyalty, wondering if humans could fight back. Why couldn't they? It was worse than defeat, it was decay. One of the admirals, an old war beast with jagged horns, finally broke the silence. His voice was rough and exhausted. "Chancellor, we must consider a retreat." The chamber tensed. No one had ever spoken those words in the history of the Empire. The High Chancellor turned his molten gold gaze toward the Admiral, and for the first time in his long rule, he felt something foreign, something vile, doubt. His claws dug into the stone of his throne. His empire had never lost, not once, and yet the humans had never tried to win, they had simply denied the Empire victory over and over and over again. The Admiral exhaled, "We have wasted too many resources. Our forces are breaking. The humans are not an enemy we can defeat in the way we are accustomed to." A heavy silence stretched over the chamber. No one argued, because everyone knew it was true. The High Chancellor closed his eyes, his rage boiling beneath his skin, and then a sound, a single, sharp, piercing beep. The chamber froze, a new transmission was coming through from the humans. The main screen flickered, and there he was, James Carter, sitting in a dimly lit room, feet up on the table, cup of coffee in hand, as casual as ever. "Hey guys," he said, his voice almost cheerful. "Been a while. How's the invasion going?" The room tensed, but James barely seemed to notice. "Oh wait," he smirked, "that's right, it's not going anywhere." His voice was filled with amusement, but his eyes, those human eyes, were cold and calculated. "You know, I've got to hand it to you," he continued, "you guys really did come in swinging, big fleets, big guns, big speeches. It was adorable." The High Chancellor's fists clenched.